but it's also a problem in the poor sections of the United States. It's called the digital divide, and there are several ways to overcome it. One way is to put public internet access in libraries, schools, and community centers. It would be a very good investment for the government to do this and get more of its citizens online.
Correct. Another thing that we as marketers often suggest to companies is something called product placement. Put your product, your concept, your service in a television show, in a movie. If you think about, for instance, the movie You've Got Mail, the name of the movie itself is the tagline for one of the largest internet providers. And you would see people in the movie online and see how it made their life simple and made their life comfortable. And that's a very good way to integrate it into people's lives.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, thank you all for your questions. Now we need to move to the second module of our program, in which Peter highlights the evolution of the Internet and the myths that have developed about the e-commerce space.
Much like gold rushes of the 19th century, e-commerce created a get-rich-quick mindset for thousands of entrepreneurs. Like grub-stake mines in days of yore, most dot-com companies have gone belly up. But it is important to remember that the gold rush left in its wake a gold mining industry that became literally the gold standard for the world economy during the next century. Similarly, the boom and bust of the dot-com has left in its wake a strong and growing e-commerce industry. There are a number of myths about electronic commerce that we will address first today. Myth number one, most e-commerce is business to consumer, or B2C. Business to consumer e-commerce accounts for less than 20% of all e-commerce. Over 80% of e-commerce is business to business, or B2B, and that number has been fairly stable for the past 5 years. Although we will talk mostly about e-tailing and the B2C sector here today, the business-to-business market makes up a great deal of sense for most companies. Let's suppose you need a ton of tungsten steel for your manufacturing business. With a click of a mouse, your purchasing department can visit websites of steel manufacturers throughout the world, selecting the company with the best price, the best delivery schedule, etc. In this world, markets are combining at a faster rate than ever, for the Internet knows no national boundaries. B2B e-commerce will continue to increase choice for businesses, hold down prices, and expand a unified global marketplace. B2B e-commerce is especially strong in computing and electronics, motor vehicles, petrochemicals, utilities, paper and office products, shipping and warehousing, food and agriculture, consumer goods, and the pharmaceutical and medical industries. Myth number two, e-tailing is dead. The death of e-commerce has been greatly exaggerated. In the first 6 months of 2001, a record number of electronic retail sales took place, even in the face of a global economic slowdown. In the U.S. and a number of northern European countries, more than 75% of all consumers bought a product online, and this number is even greater for teenagers, the consumers of the future. While the failure of companies like eToys has been spectacular, the real news of last year has been the great success of e-tail operations of traditional bricks and mortar stores such as Target, Walmart, Kmart, JCPenney, and Barnes & Noble. Myth number three, the Internet and e-commerce have run their course. It is important to keep in mind that the Internet is a toddler, not an octogenarian. A decade ago, none of us heard of the World Wide Web. if we were discussing the steam engine, this would be 1840. If we were discussing the automobile, we would be living in 1920. If we were looking at the spread of television, it would be 1955. The internet is a baby, and e-commerce is a Model T. Myth number 4, traditional retailers should stay out of e-commerce. The data show just the opposite. The most successful e-tailers are traditional bricks and mortar stores. The reality is that bricks and clicks are an excellent combination for many products. The future is in the fusion between traditional bricks and mortar stores and e-tail stores. As I said previously, the e-tailing success stories of the new millennium are real stores with good e-commerce websites. This appears to be particularly true for books, tapes and CDs, clothing, health and beauty products, toys, videos, financial services, and travel. The rules of e-business have not changed. The name of the game is attracting customers and filling orders. It appears that bricks and mortar businesses and an excellent e-commerce website are synergistic, each enhancing the other. Consumers like that there are a physical place to go or return a purchase. An e-commerce site performs an advertising and informational function as well as being a sales portal. Consumers like the convenience of buying a product from home that they saw at the store. The e-commerce headline of the new millennium, bricks and clicks go together. Myth number 5, e-commerce is just a gimmick. It has no social value. While everyone is entitled to his opinion, my belief is that e-commerce has great potential value to society. First, because it increases competition, it in turn increases consumer choice while holding down prices. It changes an overpriced local market into a competitive global market. Second, several reports suggest that e-commerce already significantly replaced physical trips to the store by 5 to 10%. This has numerous benefits, including less need to build parking lots and roads, reducing highway congestion, and controlling air pollution. In many urban areas, just a 5% reduction in air pollution or highway congestion is substantial. Like its cousin, telecommuting, e-commerce is a green technology, enabling a greater balance between consumption and pollution. Third, in a world where more elderly and disabled people have increasingly long lives, e-commerce may be a window to the world for these less mobile populations. The ability to use an online drugstore, grocery market, bookshop, or music store, to mention but a few, is a godsend for people who are immobile, disabled, or housebound. Let's talk a little bit now about the diffusion of innovations. All innovations, from hybrid corn to the use of antibiotics, from birth control devices to videotape machines, follow a predictable pattern that communication researchers call the diffusion curve. At first, only 1 to 2% of a population adopts an innovation. These people are called innovators. Innovators are high risk takers who relish the thrill of being there first. They may risk ridicule, physical harm, and economic ruin, but they also reap the reward of being first to own or try a new product, drug, practice, or device. Innovators are not always accepted or appreciated by the general population and are thought of as radicals and risk takers with their newfangled practices and dangerous devices. Imagine the first automobile drivers, the first users of birth control pills, the first farmers to use hybrid corn, or the first owners of a TV set. and you will imagine the risk and scorn that innovators were subject to. Interestingly, studies show that innovators are actually more intelligent and more educated than the general population. Innovators also have numerous interpersonal contacts and are voracious consumers of the media, two places where they learn about new ideas, practices, and technologies. Innovators are more cosmopolitan, are more likely to live in or near cities, near coastlines, and to travel extensively both in their own countries and in other countries. Perhaps most importantly, innovators serve as opinion leaders for another important segment of the population, early adopters. Early adopters represent the next 15% or so to adopt an innovation. They are similar to innovators, but they're not as likely to take great risks. In fact, they are likely to have watched the innovators carefully to assess the consequences of adopting a new innovation. Early adopters are more likely to be mainstream people than innovators are. They often have higher incomes and higher social status and are likely to be more respectable members of the community. Like innovators, though, early adopters are well educated and have many interpersonal contacts. They tend to live near urban areas and near coastlines, and they travel extensively. Most important, early adopters serve as opinion leaders for the rest of the population. If early adopters adopt an innovation, eventually the majority of the public will adopt the innovation as well. The early majority constitutes about a third of the population. Once these individuals have adopted an innovation, approximately half of the population has adopted it. The early majority tend to be open-minded, but more skeptical, and more likely to be conformists than innovators or early adopters. They are likely to have early adopters as opinion leaders and to follow their lead. The early majority is critical to the widespread adoption of a product or practice because, again, when the early majority has adopted an innovation, the practice or technology has reached 50% of the population. After that, adoption continues to grow, but at a decreasing rate. The late majority is the final large segment of a population to adopt an innovation. Constituting just over 1/3 of the population, these individuals are skeptics. They want to observe nearly everyone using an innovation, practice, or technology before they become adopters. They tend to be less educated, older, more traditional, and are more likely to live in rural areas. They consume less media and are somewhat skeptical of the modern world. The final group, the laggards, constitute 10 to 20% of the population and may not adopt an innovation at all. If they do adopt an innovation, the majority of the population may not be using it anymore. These people are extreme skeptics and often say things like, "My dad and mom didn't need it, so we don't need it either," or "We don't need any of that newfangled stuff. We get along just fine without it." Laggards view the world through the rear-view mirror, and their reference point is the past. Laggards are the most likely group to experience future shock, to be disoriented by new innovations, and to suffer the consequences of not adopting change. So what motivates us to adopt a new technology or product? Every group, even innovators and early adopters, carefully assess the potential consequences of a new innovation or technology. Research on thousands of innovations has shown that consumers throughout the world have 5 requirements that must be fulfilled before they will adopt an innovation. Once all 5 of the requirements are met, consumers are more than 90% likely to adopt an innovation. Any innovation must be perceived as having relative advantage, having compatibility with one's current lifestyle, possessing sufficient simplicity, having observability, and having trialability. Let's look at the first one, relative advantage. Any new innovation must have relative advantage, meaning that in the mind of the consumer, the advantages of the innovation outweigh the disadvantages. The widespread adoption of television, for example, occurred when consumers believed that the entertainment and information provided by the television outweighed its cost, the space it consumed, and the noise it produced. The automobile is adopted in any culture when its incredible mobility-enhancing properties outweigh its many negatives, including cost, pollution, congestion, etc. Compatibility. Any innovation must be compatible with a person's lifestyle. Getting Hindus to eat beef or devout Catholics to practice abortion would be very difficult because such practices are incompatible with deep-seated religious beliefs. Getting people in the United States to abandon their cars in favor of mass transportation or even to carpool is difficult because it goes against deeply held American beliefs about freedom and individuality. Looking now at complexity or simplicity, any innovation must be sufficiently simple in order for a consumer to adopt it. If something is too complicated, people simply won't use it. Take computers, for example. Few young people are afraid of computers. They are second nature to many young people because they've grown up with computers. The older you are, the more likely it is that you've never used a personal computer. They are viewed as too complex and require too steep a learning curve for the elderly to adopt. Getting patients to take multiple medication needed for survival is difficult because of the complexity of the regimen. Despite the dire consequences, many people forget to take medication because they cannot master the complex time schedule required for proper patient compliance. For an innovation to be adopted, it must also demonstrate observability. It must be able to be observed. People do not adopt innovations they cannot see. Getting Aboriginal people to boil water to kill germs has been difficult because many of them do not believe in germs since they cannot see them. Getting farmers in different regions throughout the world to adopt high-producing hybrid agricultural seeds was difficult because they had confidence in the old seed. A crop failure with new, unreliable seeds was considered too risky. Only when they could observe the superiority of small plots of hybrid corn next to their own crops would farmers switch to hybrids. Finally, trialability. Any potential adopter of a new technology or practice must have a chance to try it out. That is one of the reasons why free samples are still so popular with retailers of everything from soap and cereal to software. In some families, children are encouraged to take a no thank you bite of food, even though they choose not to eat it. Unless they try it, there is little chance they will incorporate it into their diet. Automobile dealers give test drives for much the same reasons. Now that we've discussed what the requirements are for an innovation to be adopted, let's look at how this relates to the diffusion of e-commerce. For the consumer, e-commerce provides a number of relative advantages compared with store or mall shopping. First and foremost is convenience. An e-transaction can be completed from the comfort of home without battling traffic, finding parking, taking public transportation, and often discovering the store does not have what you want. This relates to another advantage, cost. By reducing the cost of transportation, e-transactions are cheaper. It is also easier to comparison shop and to find bargains on the internet. However, consumers are often disappointed that prices are often high or higher on the internet, and this reduces or eliminates an important advantage of online shopping. Likewise, shipping charges are often high. In fact, most stores still treat shipping as a profit-making enterprise. E-tailers have documented a huge number of consumers that have filled their electronic shopping cart only to terminate the transaction at checkout due to the high cost of shipping. Advice to e-tailers: include shipping as part of the product price and provide free shipping. This will prevent last-minute decisions to terminate a purchase. E-tailers would also be advised not to charge more for larger orders, a common practice in e-commerce. Large orders are the most valuable orders, and adding a huge shipping cost to the order simply discourages the purchase. For a business, there are several advantages to e-commerce as well. First, electronic markets generally, but not always, lower transaction costs. That is exactly why hotel or airline companies provide lower internet rates than they offer for a live transaction. The high labor costs of an in-person transaction or a telephone conversation typically make e-transactions much more cost-effective for a retailer. Second, businesses can eliminate the middleman. This process, called disintermediation, enables the consumer to buy directly from the producer without an entire chain of distributors and salespeople, each of whom makes a profit along the chain. Third, the costs of additional store space can be reduced since part of your store is an electronic one. Finally, in an electronic environment, advertising costs are sometimes reduced because the website can replace some advertising. Any new innovation, including e-commerce, must be compatible with a person's lifestyle. An e-shopping trip requires access to a computer and an internet link and ownership of a credit card, things most of us take for granted but aren't possessed by a large segment of the world's population. In Japan, one of the world's most technologically advanced countries, people were among the fastest adopters of cell phones, but were slow to buy PCs and to surf the World Wide Web. Why? One answer is that on the crowded island of Japan, many homes are very small, and there just wasn't space for a PC. So initially, PCs were not compatible with the lifestyle of the Japanese. Today, with smaller laptops and handheld computers, the Japanese are rapidly adopting e-shopping. One major barrier to the adoption of e-commerce is that for some, it lacks simplicity. Numerous skills are involved that highly literate, well-educated people take for granted. First, a person must be literate to be able to operate a computer and find a website. Second, a person must know how to operate a PC. Third, a person might not know how to surf the web and find the appropriate stores. Finally, even the most web-savvy individuals are often baffled by the complexity of some e-commerce sites. Often complex passwords, code numbers, and user identifications are required, causing many consumers to terminate transactions at checkout. Would-be e-tailers should keep their sites simple. To facilitate the adoption of e-commerce, it is useful to have an individual be able to observe a more experienced net user conduct an e-transaction. Traditionally, in most society, it is the old that teach the young. Interestingly, as with a number of modern innovations, it is the young that are far more competent than the old. In a recent project designed to bridge the digital divide in a poor neighborhood called City Heights here in San Diego, called the Digital Bridge, we use high school students to train their parents to become internet users. My own computer consultants in the 1990s ranged from my 15-year-old daughter to my 25-year-old computer consultant. None of my teachers were even half my age. Want to try out the internet or do e-commerce? Find a kid. This brings us to the final requirement for the successful diffusion of e-commerce, trialability. People will not adopt something they cannot try. As salespeople, it would be a good idea to have an e-commerce demonstration site in a store so loyal customers can try out an e-transaction, hopefully with competent and patient supervision. In the future, we'll be moving to m-commerce or mobile commerce. Welcome to the wireless world. In the most technologically advanced countries, including most of Europe and the United States, the telephone is ubiquitous. Virtually every home and business is wired to a phone line, which is wired to a local loop that in turn was traditionally connected via long-distance wire lines to other local loops. Not so in much of the world. The majority of the world's people have no telephone and have never made a phone call. Telecommunication infrastructure is non-existent. So how can less developed countries provide the minimum infrastructure necessary to support the internet? Less developed countries face a dilemma and an opportunity. The dilemma is how to provide telephonic and internet connections for their populace. The opportunity of less developed countries and even less developed areas of developed countries is to leapfrog wire and cable and move to the wireless world of telecommunication. For less developed countries, laying copper wires and fiber optic cable may be prohibitively expensive. If we were starting from scratch and had no telecommunications infrastructure, even developed countries might not lay millions of miles of copper and fiber optic cable. Lesser developed countries from China and India to Uruguay and Paraguay have a unique opportunity to leapfrog the wire line and move straight to wireless technology. This means creating wireless local telecommunication loops in urban areas with satellite uplinks to provide the infrastructure to support the internet and e-commerce. The ability of many Central American and South American countries to leapfrog the wire line and move straight to wireless technologies is great. Certainly obstacles exist, including the cost of wireless devices, educational deficits in some parts of the population, and the introduction of broadband technologies into all countries. Nonetheless, Central and South America are poised for a wireless revolution that will have significant, beneficial economic effects on the entire region. At the present time, most B2C e-commerce is initiated by consumers who log onto desktop computers in their home or office. The next generation of mobile phones, often called third generation or 3G phones, will have high bandwidth capable of providing internet access from home or office, car or boat, city or county, without a wire line. Many experts predict that within 5 years, most of the world's people will link to the internet from handheld wireless devices than from personal computers or desktops. This is the golden opportunity for m-commerce. Want a comparison shop? Log onto the internet via a handheld device from a store. Want groceries or food delivered to home? Call on the way home from a wireless internet connection. Want to shop for Christmas while riding on a train? The possibilities for mobile commerce are limitless. Just what form these third-generation wireless devices will take is still unknown. Some will have high bandwidth, 3G mobile smartphones that are already entering the marketplace. Others will be small, wireless pocket personal computers. Still others may be wireless phones with a fold-up plug-in keyboard. Others will be high bandwidth wireless Palm Pilots. In any case, many experts predict that in the world of B2C e-commerce, wireless commerce will exceed wireline commerce. In Sweden and Finland, the majority of wireless phones are already equipped for e-commerce, a harbinger of what the rest of the world can expect in the not-so-distant future. During this presentation, I have aimed to explain how connectivity, networks, and e-commerce have had a fundamental impact on our personal and professional lives, and how innovation has impacted the development of e-commerce and mobile commerce, or m-commerce. Even though many of the companies formed to facilitate e-commerce are not any longer in existence, the value, convenience, and development of electronic commerce will continue to improve in the foreseeable future as new technologies continue to evolve and are adopted by all of us. Thank you very much.
We will now continue with the second question and answer session. To start off this session, we would like to welcome a question from a new site. We would like to welcome them to our international network. And this question comes to us from the University of Liceo Cervantino, Universidad Liceo Cervantino.
Bueno, mire, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
En uno de los comentarios que el
In
doctor
one of
Peter
the
Andersen realizó,
comments by Dr.
dijo
Peter
que
Andersen,
apenas
he
iba
said
naciendo.
that Internet was
¿Qué
just
podemos
beginning.
esperar
What
del Internet
can we
en cuanto a
expect from
innovación,
Internet as far as
en
innovation,
lo social,
in the
en lo
social,
comercial, sobre
commercial,
todo en el desarrollo de la educación,
and
por
also,
lo menos en la
and
siguiente
most
década?
importantly, in the development of education, at least in the next decade?
Okay, this question is addressed to Dr. Peter Andersen, and it asks him to take out his crystal ball and predict something about the future of the Internet.
Well, as the internet spreads, and it will spread as most innovations do,